I caught my wife cheating, but the truth was even worse.
It was supposed to be just another event, another glittering evening in Hollywood. Robert Downey Jr. had attended hundreds of these charity galas, his charm and wit always on full display, a calculated dance of smiles and polite small talk. But tonight, something was different. The crowd felt more suffocating than usual, the flashes of cameras more blinding. And Robert? He felt trapped. The night started like any other. He arrived with his usual entourage, a crisp black suit hugging his frame. His signature smirk was in place, and the flashes of the paparazzi felt like they were meant for him, always for him. He didn't mind it most days, but tonight? It hit him differently. The smile he gave the cameras was tight, forced, like he was pretending to enjoy the game when all he wanted was to walk away and disappear. Inside the venue, the energy was electric. Hundreds of people mingled, their laughter and conversation filling the massive hall. The grand chandeliers above glistened, casting a soft glow over the gold-trimmed walls. The charity was for a cause he genuinely cared about, but at this point, it felt more like a performance than anything else. And Robert was tired. Tired of the persona he had to maintain, tired of the expectations, tired of the constant scrutiny. It wasn't long before the fans began to gather around him. A woman, likely in her early 20s, stepped forward. She had that excited gleam in her eyes, that nervous energy that only comes from meeting a celebrity in person. She extended a piece of paper with trembling hands. "Mr. Downey, could I get your autograph?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Her voice carried the unmistakable sound of awe, as if she had just met someone who existed in a different world. Robert's first instinct was to smile, to be polite, he always was. But something inside him tightened. Not today, he thought. He signed the paper with a flourish, handing it back to her. She looked at the signature, beaming. "Thank you so much," she said, almost breathless. Robert nodded, then started to move away. But then she took one more step forward. "Could we get a quick picture? Please?" Her hand reached out, and her fingers brushed his. That small gesture, something so innocent, was enough to set him off. His body froze, the briefest of pauses in his step. A flash of something, anger, frustration, crossed his face, though it was gone before most could notice. The tension in the air thickened, though no one knew yet what was about to happen. Robert looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he snapped. "No," he said sharply, his voice colder than the icy chill that had suddenly gripped the room. "You don't just touch me like that." His words echoed in the space between them, cutting through the chatter and music. The fan, taken aback, took a step back. She stammered, eyes wide in shock. I didn't mean," she started to apologize, but Robert wasn't listening anymore. He could feel his blood rising, the anger swelling in his chest, and suddenly it was like he couldn't control it. "Why is it always like this?" he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for those around him to hear. His words felt like a release, something he had been holding back for too long. "You people think I owe you something. Just because you want a picture, an autograph, it's like I'm a freaking puppet for your amusement." He was breathing harder now, his words sharp and bitter. The crowd around him had gone quiet. Some people stared, unsure of what to do, others looked at the ground, avoiding eye contact. The woman who had asked for the picture stood frozen, her face pale, lips parted in disbelief. Robert looked at her for a moment, his anger fading into something else, something more vulnerable, maybe regret? But before anyone could intervene, he turned and walked away. The camera flashes continued, but no one was taking pictures of the polished, charming Robert Downey Jr. anymore. They were capturing a man unraveling in front of their eyes, a man who had lost his usual cool and wasn't going to get it back tonight. Behind the scenes, the team that managed Robert's public image was in full damage control mode. Calls were made, meetings were arranged, and a PR rep was dispatched to speak to him. Robert was sitting in a corner, staring at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. The chaos of the evening had left him rattled, but not for the reasons anyone thought. "Robert, we need to talk," his publicist said, walking over to him. Her voice was calm, but there was an urgency to it. "You need to apologize. The press is already spinning this. They're calling it a meltdown." He didn't even look up. "No apology," he muttered, his voice flat. "I'm not going to apologize for being real." He finally looked up at her, eyes tired, but unyielding. "I can't keep pretending anymore. I'm not some robot for people to gawk at and get their entertainment from. I'm not that Robert. And I'm done being the one they expect me to be." The next day, the media was all over it. Headlines screamed about his outburst, public breakdown, and the unrecognizable side of Robert Downey Jr. Speculation ran rampant. What happened? Was this a sign of something deeper, something more serious? Some tabloids jumped to conclusions, claiming it was a reaction to the pressures of fame. Others wondered if his past struggles with addiction had caught up to him. But the truth, as it often does, was far more complex. A few days later, Robert sat down for a private interview. It wasn't a carefully staged event. No makeup. No cameras buzzing around. Just him, his words, and the honesty that he had been avoiding for so long. "I'm tired," he admitted quietly, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "I'm tired of pretending. I've been wearing a mask for years, giving everyone what they wanted, always smiling, always performing. But I can't do it anymore. I've been at the top, I've seen the glory, but it's a damn lonely place up here." He paused, taking a deep breath, as though searching for the right words. That night, it wasn't about the fan. It wasn't about the picture. It was about everything I've been keeping inside for too long. I've been carrying this weight, this pressure, and for the first time in a long time, I let it out. For a moment, he looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry for what I said. I needed to say it." It was a raw, emotional confession, one that left the world with more questions than answers. But the fans, the people who truly cared about him, understood. They saw past the outburst, past the anger. They saw a man who was finally being real. And in a world where so many hide behind masks, it was a moment of raw, unapologetic truth. The story didn't end with an apology. It didn't need to. Instead, it opened up a new chapter in Robert's life, one where he wasn't afraid to be himself, flaws and all. And the world? Well, the world would have to adjust to the new Robert Downey Jr., the one who was finally free to stop pretending. In the days that followed, something unexpected began to happen. The public reaction wasn't as harsh as his team had feared. In fact, there was a groundswell of support. Fans who had once seen Robert as a perfect Hollywood star, flawless and untouchable, began to see him as a real person, a person who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long. And the more he spoke, the more they understood. Robert started showing up to interviews without the usual polished demeanor. He let his guard down. No longer just the charming, quick-witted actor who cracked jokes in front of the camera, Robert became a man who could talk about his struggles, his insecurities, and his journey with an honesty that was almost foreign to the celebrity world. At a press junket for a new film, instead of answering questions with rehearsed responses, Robert spoke about the pressures of fame, the toll it had taken on his personal life, and how he had spent years trying to conform to the expectations of others. He admitted to feeling isolated, even when surrounded by people, and how he often wondered if anyone would ever truly see the real him. "Do you know what it's like to be constantly watched, analyzed, judged?" he asked the crowd, his voice steady but filled with an emotion that seemed to catch everyone off guard. "I've spent my whole life feeling like I'm on display, like I'm supposed to be perfect for the world. But here's the thing, I'm not. I'm flawed. I'm human. And that's okay." In the months that followed, Robert took more control over his narrative. He began to prioritize projects that mattered to him, ones that pushed boundaries and challenged societal norms. Instead of just choosing roles for the sake of box office numbers or accolades, he picked roles that allowed him to explore different aspects of humanity, roles that reflected the complexity of his own experiences. The audience, for the first time, saw a side of Robert they hadn't known before. But it wasn't just about his work. Robert started engaging with his fans in a more meaningful way. He held live Q&As, where he would talk about everything from mental health to his love for music. He became an advocate for issues that mattered to him, unapologetically using his platform to spread awareness. And the more open he became, the more his fans connected with him. They saw a man who wasn't afraid to show his scars, to admit he didn't have all the answers. He wasn't the perfect, untouchable movie star anymore. Instead, he was a man who had fought demons, dealt with loss, and had learned to embrace his flaws. And in that rawness, in that vulnerability, they found someone they could relate to, someone who had grown just like they had. The world, slowly but surely, began to shift. The media, at first hesitant, caught on. Instead of feeding into the typical tabloid fodder, they began to celebrate Robert for his authenticity. Even the most cynical critics couldn't ignore how much of a breath of fresh air he was in an industry built on facades. The same people who had once mocked his meltdown now applauded his courage to be himself. It wasn't all easy, of course. There were moments when the past still tugged at him, when old habits or pressures crept in, reminding him of the years he had spent hiding behind a mask. But Robert had made a decision. He wasn't going back. Not to that hollow version of himself. He had learned the hard way that true peace comes from acceptance, from embracing your flaws and finding strength in them. As he sat in his home one evening, looking out over the city skyline, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He was finally free, not just from the expectations of others, but from the chains he had placed on himself. For the first time in a long time, Robert Downey Jr. was content, not because he was perfect, but because he was finally real. And in that realness, he found a new kind of power, the power of being unapologetically himself. In the end, the world did adjust. It had no choice. The new Robert Downey Jr., flawed, human, and undeniably authentic, wasn't just a version of him the world could accept. It was the version of him the world had been waiting for all along.